Dobry wiecie siem.
Today, we're going to the mines. For inspection this time. Those barely seem safe. They have been renovated several times already, and the old ones have been closed. Mirror dungeons? Oh right, that's their official name. So first we'll see how we've been doing till now, and how the mines have been changed to suit the company's new needs over time.
Alright, that's enough. So a bit of retrospective first, shall we? The first mirror dungeon was already here at release. It was only 3 floors and very bare bones. At this point, only regular, focused and risky encounters were there outside bosses and events. No cost, no shops, no starlight. You chose 3 IDs level 10 to get in, and rolled through levels. Winning a battle could grant you an ego gift or a level up. Events were divided into abnormality ones, the classic we know and love, and others including either healing, recruiting, or upgrading, the last one allowing to upgrade as much units as floor numbers, each getting 5 levels. When defeating a boss or going into the recruiting node, you could get another sinner out of 3 for your party, their level scaling each floor. It really was the Mirror of Beginnings, wasn't it? The formula was still very raw. Runs were very different because you had very few control over getting ego gifts, which became Mirror Dungeon's selling point, and even your sinners' compositions were highly random. It was still a very unrefined idea. However, it gave the structure which was still kept to that day. A roguelike dungeon where you start with a comp, choose a path, and go through nodes until you get to the boss. Build it to get the reward, get to the next floor, then repeat until dungeon's end. In itself a now recurrent way of roguelike designs. Dungeons were also introduced in the main story, but had a way more narrative structure with custom events and fights, as they are, well, story dungeons. But the node structure is something they had in common. However, one thing that this first MD setup was the reward. Mirror dungeons were going to become the main source of ego shards. The rewards value were changed a few weeks after Limbus release, with the appearance of excavation stages, removing EXP, but also adding lunacy, becoming one of the rare sources of lunacy outside maintenance. It also reduced the number of weekly bonuses from 5 to 3, as they realized that 5 MD per week could get stale, as they are a longer type of content. Making long daily content is a good way to make things tedious. However, MD1 gave us ego shards crates directly, with added pass XP for bonus crates. The main difference being for free-to-play players, where collecting shards nowadays fully depends on your BP. This seems like a downside. However, it is not, because what the old system would have given you with weekly bonuses, they made the wise decision to just include it directly into the free part of the battle pass, making it so we now have a shit ton of boxes in the BP. But let's talk about the other changes that happened when we moved on to Season 2 with MD2 introduction on June 29th, because boy, there was a lot. They decided to refine the experience a lot, making it into a more fun and challenging content, which wouldn't just be mindless farm. And to do this, they decided to revamp the whole of it, as well as adding a lot of quality of life improvements. From the start, you now don't need modules to enter, but only to collect rewards, giving the player a chance to not waste their precious enkephalin on poor runs, and removing the need for simulations. Once you enter, you then choose 5 sinners instead of 3, this time already fully leveled, as they remove the leveling up happening during the dungeon, allowing them to balance it in a more stable environment. Afterwards, the dungeon keeps its structure, but now on 5 floors, floor 2 and 4 increasing your party size up to 7. However, the source of all evils was introduced, the way money, or cost rather, as now everything costs cost, from IDs to ego gifts, but also healing or the new skill change. Well, that also makes a lot to talk about. First, adding IDs is no longer random, but happens by buying them at the new shop nodes, where you can also buy ego gifts. Those options give the player more control over their run by removing a lot of random frustration from the equation. Though you weren't guaranteed to get the ego gifts you wanted, you had at least more choice and total control over your IDs and egos. Rest stops were also introduced as a replacement to healing events, allowing for free heals or also usable to add IDs. Shops could also heal, but for a cost. Shops also got another interesting function to exchange skills of IDs in the deck for higher graded ones. The idea behind this was probably for players to maybe abuse more of the sinner's stronger skills for fun overpowered combos. Outside of new content, like fights, bosses and gifts, that's most of it for the changes in the dungeon. Note that they were also applied for MD1, though with a more stable environment, they also decided to augment the difficulty by giving enemies buffs as you advance through the floors. Now, as for the rewards, they are mainly the same, with the changes I mentioned earlier, but in larger quantity. However, they also added another currency as a reward, Starlight, used for the new starter buffs, a set of buffs available to the player to ease their subsequent runs, ranging from 4% increased damage to 1 less stagger threshold. So these could change your experience a lot. Overall, the modifications greatly changed the way we experience mirror dungeons, turning them into something closer to the ones we have now. But what really turned mirror dungeons from mindless win rate grinds to the limit of speedrun into actually challenging content needing more careful approach was definitely the hard version. And hard it was, for 2 weeks later was added the infamous hard mirror dungeon 2. And the ball. So first thing, you didn't just get to enter with your IDs already max level. You had to level them up manually beforehand, which could give you some disadvantage if you split your XP on a lot of units. Your uptide and threat spin levels didn't change, but that's the same for the normal version. And here were the conditions for MD2H. A bit intimidating at first, having all starter buffs in particular. They could be a very good help, but required quite a bit of dedication to farming. But to be fair, you didn't need to fulfill those conditions, but it would be a bit harder than it already was. Furthermore, you couldn't just bring all your best 3 stars, as you were limited by cost for units to bring, forcing you to bring at least 1 or 2 stars. Depending on your strategy, this could be a problem or not at all. As for how hard, we're talking about very strong power buffs to all enemies for the whole dungeon. Strong enough so that last bosses could just outroll egos. The first floor was tamer, as long as you didn't fall on blunt nodes, but still could pose quite a threat, especially as you were building sanity and sin gauges. The thing is, in hard dungeons, they decided you couldn't predict your pass in advance, seeing only one node at a time. This was meant to add complexity to pass choice by taking risks into account, but still giving the player some choice, rather than just putting them on a unique pass. It could pose a problem for missing important nodes like shops, but those were put at fixed, unmissable spots at the start of each floor, floor 3 being a rest stop, and floor 5 having another shop before the last boss. This structure was quite a success, in difficulty terms at least. Last fights required the use of egos to ensure a somewhat safe passage, and the last 2 bosses could actually pose a threat if not managed properly, underleveled, or with an unoptimized comp, especially the last one. However, one big change with Season 2 for all dungeons was that you kept all sin resources after battle, which greatly helped. Ego gifts did also receive some restriction at the time, as not only did you not choose a starter one anymore, but which you could find was also limited by their rarity and the floor you were in. And that's pretty much it for hard MD2. This version was really an interesting test for both players' management skills and different types of comps, as it was a good place to try them, as well as new IDs and egos, though the starting buffs or ego gifts could somewhat distort perception for other content. However, it was a longer format, which is why they had to also change the rewards. The hard version obviously already yielded higher rewards in the form of more pass experience, though it was slightly more costly too, but doing it 3 times a week could be very tedious. So they reduced it to only 1 time per week, with the possibility to apply all weekly bonuses at once, which was a great way to save a lot of players' sanity, including mine. But now, those times are over. For Season 3, PM decided to close the Mirror of the Beginning and the Mirror of Mirrors. Instead, players can now only experience MD3, the Mirror of the Lake. From the looks of it, it is likely that Mirror Dungeons will be added each season, replacing the old ones. As it is still a new practice they are doing, it is unknown how much the format we have now will change again, but this has advantages and inconvenience. The first advantage is that players can access latest Mirror Dungeon earlier. Mirror Dungeons were only available after 2.19, already before that, however only MD1 was available, MD2 require finishing Canto 4. Now, newer players can already get the higher dungeon experience, being able to play max level IDs earlier, giving some form of a practice ground. They can also get the better rewards of MD2. However, this does have the disadvantage of not only not experiencing earlier content, putting them into the full bath of MD3 and later content, which can be or not be an inconvenience for Overload, but more importantly, make them fight human encounters that you'll find later in the story. Why do we fight this at this point? Of course it's blurred, it's a spoiler! In truth, this was already the case with the first Mirror Dungeon that you unlocked before Canto 3, but having Canto 3 enemies. And we are talking about several cantos ahead now. It lacks context and does not include major enemies, so it really depends on one's own perception of what is a spoiler, but it's either irrelevant or inconvenient. Not having other dungeons to worry about does ease PM management though. But enough about lament! No time like the present. And MD3 did bring us a new form of present. While less drastic than for Season 2, they did revamp the system quite a bit. Let's start with before the beginning, as starter buffs were reset and completely changed. All stat changes buffs were gone, to the profit of a whole new system entirely based around ego gifts. Remember when I said it was Mirror Dungeon's selling point? Well, they decided to entirely capitalize on it. They could bring some drastic gameplay changes by themselves, and so PM decided to trade broken buffs for a bunch of broken ego gifts. The buffs even including gifts additions, leaning even more into a roguelite rather than a roguelike design, with meta progression. While we are on starter buffs, they also changed and detailed the Starlight rewards and increased the overall gains by incentivizing playing different IDs and comps by giving each ID a rest bonus, which increased each run if not used and was then consumed for more Starlight. As a fan of theory crafting and experimenting, I love it. But more on starter buffs later. Most of the changes in the dungeon were based around ego gifts, giving the player a lot more control. Starter gifts already have much more choices, based around the 7 main archetypes that I talked about in my other video, with Starlight bonus encouraging variation. In the dungeon, ego gifts became not only artifacts that you collected, but some form of inventory management, for you could now enhance them, fuse them, and sell them. Enhancing only works on some ego gifts, increasing their numbers. Each enhancement costs cost, and can be done 2 times. Fusing egos, meanwhile, can not only be used to recycle those you don't want, but also can grant higher grade ones, and even special ones for archetypes by fusing specific gifts, those unlocked by starter buffs. You know, roguelite. Those actions can be performed at rest stops, while selling them is done at shops. They also give the possibility to refresh store inventory. All those options are great to give the player more control and giving another management aspect to the dungeon. It also makes it very likely to get the build you want, which can help immensely, more than all starter buffs, and make for some very fun runs by enabling most of the archetype's potential, or even more. Even if this archetype's focus also means less bonuses to more general comps. All those changes require more cost too, so they did change and increased cost gain, especially at start. Last thing about ego gifts is how they decided to tie those you get from bosses to enemies' floor buffs, removing the old fixed one for viable ones of your choice, also creating a risk-reward management. This is pretty much it for the changes, with healing always costing resources. The last big one is your team choice, as you don't choose only some IDs anymore, but your whole team at once, and gaining more cost if you vary the IDs you use or by using 1 and 2 stars. I don't have much else to say. I love the new design. The ego gifts focus really made the Mirror Dungeons stand on their own with their own identity, and the roguelite focus gives a nice feeling of progression while allowing different experiences with team variation. But now, we're getting into the big stuff. The big H, as in hard. And before we get into the dungeon, I have to address starter buffs one last big time. Big as in numbers this time. With the hard version, Project Moon released the second part of their starter buffs tree. It included some stats increase nodes, which aren't too big, but still exist, and I'm very conflicted on those. But more importantly, they added secondary buffs, which are smaller nodes associated to main ones. When I saw this picture, I had no idea what to expect. And then it came out. And flabbergastation is something that went on my face. Not only the buffs add off secondary, only the names, a lot of effects being as good or stronger than their main nodes, but they were about as costly too. So you know what is coming. I love numbers. Time to calculate this tree. So the wall of it added, if I correctly remember the ones I already bought because I didn't think of noting their cost beforehand, we're getting 25,700 starlight, but let's round it up to 26k. On approximate calculations on our Mirror Dungeon 3 with 20 encounters, 20 ego gifts, and all rest and starting gift bonus, we get around 275 starlight per run. So in total, the entire tree would require about 94 wall hard Mirror Dungeon 3 full runs to complete, and let's say one more for building rest bonuses. A reminder that the season lasts about 17 weeks, so doing once a week won't be enough. Heck, a year is 52 weeks. However, with the size of the tree and the way it's done, I'm wondering and even inclined to think that this tree might become permanent in the long run, which could explain why they made so much buffs. They also made a way to use Starlight as single-use buffs for the current dungeon once the main tree is complete, leaning into the earlier theory, but I'd really rather complete the whole tree beforehand. It could also be annoying to have progression reset each season. Also, if we take MD3 as a scale, where you can average 160 Starlight per run with bonuses, it makes about 160 runs too. But now, about the dungeon itself. Hard MD3 is... Horseman! My sanity was quickly drained and I loved it. As I go through the changes first, there aren't that much this time, especially compared to Hard MD2. The ID's levels are based on your owns again rather than maxed out, and the unpredictable future made its return. The biggest change was the 5th floor addition compared to the normal version, which is a great way of differentiating them. What was not great is making all fights of said 5th floor outside the boss 2 waves. In itself, a good idea, but enemies are so strong at this point that doing 2 waves really cranks up the difficulty from the previous floor. And I'd better not mention risky encounters, which finally fully deserve the name. As for why enemies are so strong, we have to check the way enemy buffs work. They went with the MD3 way of choosing enemies buffs each floor, except each buff can be consequent with like 10 offense level bonus. This is also paired with an enemy level increase depending on the tier of the ego linked with it. Like for the original, a good follow-up on the risk-reward management, giving the player more choice. As a parenthesis, it helps checking the gift tier, though I really like it being really indicated. For rewards, when completing the wall thing, the Starlight bonus does increase significantly. However, all lunacy, but especially the Battle Pass EXP received, stayed the same compared to the MD2 counterpart for both normal and hard. This may indicate this is a cruising speed for ego shards gain, or at least that they don't intend to add more shards costing mechanics in the near future. Removing the old versions removes the possibility of doing easier content for the same rewards too, which seem a bit cheap, since you need higher levels for the hard version. As a side note though, same rewards mean my Battle Pass analysis is still entirely valid. But well, that's enough for the inspection. As for my own opinion, as I said, I really like the direction they are taking, however, I'm worried that they are gonna keep changing the dungeons each season while not even increasing the rewards. But for the iteration we have with Season 3, I think it's really fun. They managed to make it a more engaging experience, with a more clear identity compared to Railway, especially in terms of late game content with the hard version. The buffs being stats and level based reflects my complaints about Railway 2 high cycles, where having both stats increase and bonus damage modifier was too much, and they did base hard MD3 on only the first half, making it more interesting. They also kept the choose your enemy buffs concept from it. I do think they learned a lot from it, and it feels great to see them improve the game more each season. Again, I really like what they did with the mines, and I hope they managed to finish setting up with the structure. I wouldn't mind if the next MDs didn't have much changes compared to this one, outside of being able to fuse White Gossipian. And that's the end of the video. Thank you for watching. Final message, it's the end of the year, and if you're watching this early, I wish you all a Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. This should have been my last video for the year, but they are releasing the new side canto before New Year, so depending on the content, I might do an ideas, egos and rewards review. I'll give news in the community section. In the meanwhile, see you next time and keep your sanity high in this slow descent into the inferno.